Hi, I'm Drew Wilson from FreezeNet. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. As you can see, it's not video game footage at all, and in fact, the table is out once again. And today I decided to do a bit of a retrospective. The last time you saw this table, it was me basically introducing you to the PlayStation 3, or at least introducing myself to the PlayStation 3, because I had not played PlayStation 3 games ever up until basically last year. And I wanted to kind of, go back and kind of share some memories of all the games I played throughout 2021. And it was basically me shooting around in the dark a little bit. I did a little bit of research of what I wanted to play, but I was just trying to figure out what I needed to play, and there is a bit of a method to my madness here as well. And if you are very familiar with these games, then you'll kind of notice a bit of a pattern, and that is when I first try and get into a new console in a new generation, what I do is what I like to call a probing amount of, just an initial probe of the different years. And basically what I do is I go in and say, okay, what was like the initial first title for the console in question, and try and play a launch title, and then I go throughout the release years from there, one title per release year. So that was kind of the my initial concept of trying to go through all these games, and you'll kind of notice that I skipped a few I skipped I think 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, and then I ended up duplicating a year. So it's not perfect, but given what I had to work with, that was the best I could do. So without further ado, let's check out the different games I played throughout 2021. And as mentioned, it was a launch title for the PlayStation 3, and the first game I ended up playing was a racing game. That is Ridge Racer 7. Now, Ridge Racer 7 was kind of an interesting title because what it did was continued on with almost like a background tradition in the video game development world, where a new console was released, and therefore a new Ridge Racer title would be released along with it. And I think PlayStation 3 was like the last console that really did that. So it was kind of interesting to see the last title that ended up being the last of the series. And for me, it was interesting because this game was like a very arcadey feel for a game, but at the same time, it had like really realistic graphics compared to like Nintendo 64 or PlayStation 1. So it kind of had an interesting combination of two different styles going for it, and it made for a fairly unique experience. So from there, I ended up playing another racing game, which was MotorStorm. A lot more people were familiar with this title, and I think it was with good reason. It was fairly unique in that you're kind of driving around in the dirt and mud and stuff like that, and you had multiple vehicles, you had multiple routes throughout the track. So even though you're playing the same track, if you have a different vehicle, which the game often forces you to play different vehicles, then you basically experienced a whole new variation of the track, which almost felt like a brand new track. And it also had the nitro system, which depends on how much heat you have on your engine. So I thought that there was a lot of interesting concepts going along for that game. And from there, I decided to do something that wasn't a racing game, because I basically played two in a row there. And I went with a title that was, I think a lot more people are familiar with, and it was a platforming/adventure game, and that was Little Big Planet. And this ended up being the Game of the Year edition. It's just what I happened to come across when I bought this game. And it basically did that whole stylistic artist type thing, and it had a lot of arts and crafts theme. You had 2D NPCs, or non-playable characters, you interacted with. You could apply stickers to anywhere you wanted to place them, and anywhere in the level. It had like a level editor. It had a whole bunch of different features that really took that whole artistic style arts and crafts feel to another level, which I have seen before with Yoshi's Island, where it had like the kind of coloring book style to it, and this one kind of dove into the more arts and crafts side of things. So it was an interesting title to say the least. Going through that the first time. After that was another racing game. I admit I did play a lot of racing games initially. This one was another one of those titles that not a lot of people are familiar with, but it did have sort of a cult following, and that was Split Second. And Split Second was a very interesting racing game in my view. It basically took some of the concepts you would see in, say, a Burnout game, and where you kind of drifted or did a whole bunch of different stuff too, and more stunts more than anything else, driving stunts. And you filled up a meter, which does sound like just, oh yeah, it's just another Burnout game, but what you were filling up wasn't for nitrous boost. You were filling up a meter for power plays, and power plays basically allowed you to blow up various things along the track and taking out your opponents at the same time. And you had different levels of power plays, that sort of thing, and you could just about blow up almost everything on the track while you drove along. And I thought it was a very unique and interesting racing experience, and one that I ended up highly recommending. And even though a lot of people haven't played it, I think it was a good game. So from there, I played one more racing game, and this is like a very obvious title if you know Sony, PlayStation, and racing games, and I was pretty familiar with the series too by the time I got to this game. But what I ended up playing was Gran Turismo 5. And Gran Turismo 5 was kind of like the standard racing simulation. If you experience something in the game itself, chances are that's what you would similarly experienced in real life. And of course, it upgraded the graphics from the PlayStation 2 versions, Gran Turismo 4 and Gran Turismo 3. And it introduced a lot of new cars as well, a number of different vehicles. You had trucks. It also had like the experience point system that was kind of introduced, as well as like added racing lines to kind of help you improve your driving a little bit quicker than before. And one of my editor actually for the podcast said that, yeah, Gran Turismo, once you play one, you played them all. And I can see that because this title kind of only introduced like 2 new tracks. They were good tracks, but there was not a lot in the way of new tracks and experience for me. But you know what? I gave it a chance anyway, and it was kind of interesting, like some of the small things that they ended up doing with the title afterwards. After that, I thought since I played one, I'll play another game on that same franchise, and this was, of course, the adventure game Little Big Planet 2. And Little Big Planet 2, of course, sequel to Little Big Planet, and it's kind of added a few new features. It largely stuck with the formula for better or worse. You still had the art style, you still had the level editor, and there was a few new features like extra levels where you tried to clear certain objectives, and you had like things put on your head, and you could like fire like, I don't know, paint and stuff. So I'm not sure it did add a whole lot, but if you never played the first one and you wanted to play the second one, I would definitely recommend it anyway. Because it was an interesting experience to say the least. And so after I played that, I started diving into the more action adventures type of games that a lot of people were seemingly talking about. And for my first action adventure game, I ended up playing a title that was a title that a lot of people were familiar with but never actually played, and that was Dishonored. And Dishonored has that kind of steampunk Victorian era art going for it, but also had like sort of magic mana going for it as well. You could teleport yourself into different locations, and it didn't tell you right away that your actions had consequences, what actions had those consequences. You just found out towards the end of the game that, oh yeah, your actions had consequences, and this is what you ended up getting. And that kind of annoyed me a little bit, admittedly, but it was an interesting concept, and a lot of people kind of gravitated towards that. So that was my experience with Dishonored. And continuing on with the theme of action-adventure, in fact, it's more like a third-person shooter, but this is a title that a lot of people are familiar with, and I thought, you know what, I may as well try and play this early just to see what the hype was about, and that, of course, was The Last of Us. Kind of a zombie apocalypse type of game, and you had a crafting system, and you tried to basically, it was more like a survival type of shooter game, and you tried to get from point A to point B, that sort of thing. And it had a lot of storyline along with it as well. From there, I ended up playing yet another title that seemed like a lot of people have heard of, never actually played, and that was Watch Dogs. And Watch Dogs kind of had like a future dystopian type of narrative going for it, where the whole city in question is a smart city, and you could hack into different things, peer into the lives of different people, unfiltered. And the publishers at the very least tried to push the whole philosophical thing, but in the game itself, it was, I guess you could say, a jack of all trades, master of none. It had four-handed Texas Hold'em no limit poker. It had different puzzle games. It had platforming, things like cash runs. And of course it had the storyline as well as some racing elements. And it did a lot. I think if it stuck with like the more puzzle kind of slash hacking, maybe a little bit of that stealth going on for it, kind of a bit like what Portal did. I think I would have liked it a little bit more, but it had a lot of interesting concepts going for it, and some people really gravitated towards it. And after that, since I got through basically early days of the PlayStation 3 to the later days of the PlayStation 3, I started to think about, okay, so what games do I want to play next, and what should be kind of critical? And so I knew that a lot of people were familiar with this particular series, so I decided to give it a try. And that, of course, was Uncharted Drake's Fortune. And apparently a lot of people hadn't played this one, and but they knew about the series because of later titles. And for me, generally speaking, this was one of those titles that was kind of a prototype. There was some things that did well, some things that didn't. And it was an okay game. I'm not sure it was a particularly amazing game, but it did set the stage for what later titles would have. And of course, that leads me to the latest game I played, and that of course is Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, of course, did a lot to kind of take what was in this game and kind of tighten things down, make it a little bit better. And I think it did that very successfully. Whether or not it innovated beyond the whole rock climbing thing, I'm not so sure, but it's still worth playing. So basically that was it for the my first year, and if I had to make recommendations, there was only two. That would be MotorStorm and Split Second. I know, not exactly like racing games, wow, for the PlayStation 3, but that ended up being the two standout titles for me. And of the two, if I had to choose between the two, it would be a really tough one for me. But my favorite of this whole lot so far was Split Second. A lot of interesting innovation involved in that. So that would be my personal recommendation. What do you think of the different titles? I'm just curious what you think. Which ones were favorites for you? Have you played all these? Maybe not so much some of these titles. Any fond memories of them? Let me know in the comments below. So I guess that is it for my retrospective. If you want to support our channel, there's plenty of ways you can do that. You can support us via patreon.com/FreezeNet. It's a subscription thing. You get insider information. People knew about this particular video coming out in advance. And if you want that insider information, you can subscribe. You can also drop us a like, give us and subscribe to us. Both those help out a lot for our channel. You can also check out our website, freezenet.ca. Lots of different news and reviews, and yeah, and even a full-fledged wiki. So lots of ways you can support us. So that is all for now, and until next time, keep it cool.